Thank you very much. Thank you to the Hungarian National Museum for the invitation to this truly interdisciplinary conference. I'm very happy to be here. And today I'm going to share with you my experience as a military officer in the 1 CMI Command of the Netherlands on cultural property protection in civil and military cooperation. I'm here to share my experiences in a very, as part of an operational unit and from a very tactical perspective. And actually going to tell you about the, very similar points that you've just heard from my colleagues, Dr. Rush, Commander Curtis, and Captain Tim LeBert, about CPP and military practice. And I will show you how we are doing this. So first, to introduce myself, what is my role and what is my organization about? So I am an officer in the Dutch military. I'm working here since 3 years as part of the section of Cultural Affairs and Information. And this section is part, as I mentioned, of the Civil Military Interaction Command. So in this section, I'm a liaison officer on CPP, which means that I also have the task of being the bridge between military and civilian authorities on CPP while trying to implement the topic into the Army's practice. So the main things that I do are developing research, education material, and training material for our military, but I will go a little bit more into detail about that later. First, I want to share you a little bit of history as well on where does CPP come from in the Netherlands. And I've added a picture to this presentation. Oh, yes, there it is. To kind of start this conversation off, here you see me in my daily uniform when I go to the military base in Apeldoorn. I'm there about 3 days a week. And you see me here standing in front of an art bunker, actually, that was created before the Second World War and also used in advance of the Second World War and a little bit during as well. And this is an art bunker that you can still visit. It's close to Amsterdam, but a little bit to the left side in the dunes. And this art bunker, after the Second World War, has also been marked with 3 blue shields. So the history of cultural property protection in the Netherlands is a history that kind of also starts with the Second World War and with the monuments men that you are probably a little bit familiar with. And I want to start with a quote coming from this period. So here comes the quote. "The Dutch people hold their monuments and the art of their past in high esteem. They cherish their old towns and are proud of their famous museums filled with the works of their old masters. And being realistic, Hollanders know very well that these art treasures have brought thousands of tourists into their country and how much they have contributed to the economy, fame, and prestige of the nation. But besides this, the Dutch are, by nature and by long tradition, sensitive to artistic and cultural achievements, and few things would affect them more than the destruction of their beloved old cities, art collections, or other distinguished cultural institutions. Therefore, any protection or preservation of this material will impress the Dutch population favorably and improve relations with an army of occupation." So where did this quote come from? Would it be something of a historical reference or an anthropological study of the Dutch people? And actually this quote, even though it's quite old, it still resonates with me. But no, this is a quote that is actually coming from the CPP officers during the Second World War in the Civil Affairs Unit, also known as the Monuments Men. So I took this quote from the Civil Affairs Manual, and I think I got this picture from you, Dr. Rush. And the Civil Affairs Manual of the Monuments Men also included a chapter about the Netherlands with a section on cultural institutions. So this quote actually also shows you that what they did during the Second World War is still quite familiar to what the work looks like now. It's not only about locating important collections, locating important institutions, but it's also about giving an analysis of the culture that you're operating in and locating the stakeholders that you need to talk to. So the Monuments Men were quite an example also for the Dutch military that formed a unit quite a few years later. And the Dutch government realized that being a military officer doing this work had a few advantages, such as more access to territory, more access to communication in times of conflict. So they realized that cultural heritage protection should not only be a civilian affair, it should also be a military task. So to move on, we have of course the 1954 Hague Convention, and I'm not going to tell that much more about it because it was already mentioned. But for us in the Netherlands, the 1954 Hague Convention was also the start for us to really officially instate a cultural property protection unit. And it is still the legal basis upon which we do our work. So in 1953, a little bit ahead of the curve, the Dutch government decided that it would be good to instate the so-called Bureau of Cultural Heritage, which consisted out of 12 recruited reserve officers that all had an expertise in the civilian world in art preservation, architectural conservation, archival management, and so on. So also quite similar to the Monuments Men, actually. And the idea was that every military region should have at least one art protection officer, and their tasks were also to advise military commanders to make lists to locate important monuments, but also possible locations for evacuation, such as the art bunker that I showed in the beginning of this presentation. And this was not only during war, but also in crisis situations, like major floods or major fires. And the picture that you see here, we can regard this as a bit of a joint operation, because you see a naval officer and an army officer together evacuating one of the royal palaces in a major fire. So this was mainly the focus of this Bureau of Cultural Heritage. It was about art bunkers and crisis response. But times since then have changed, of course, and for us a real turning point was at the end of the Cold War, and this would count for many other countries in Europe, that the defense focus would shift from focusing on national heritage protection to more of an outward focus on taking part in international coalition deployments. So for us in 1993 there came a new defense doctrine, which was also called A Different World, A Different Defense, which also says much. And our involvement in UN Pro 4, in the Bosnia deployments in UN context, really changed the work as Bureau of Cultural Heritage that we did. Because we noticed that not only training about cultural heritage protection, about what is the Hague Convention was relevant, but the soldiers that came back from this deployment indicated that they should also be trained more in how to operate in a foreign environment. Because you can imagine that for this deployment, for a lot of the Dutch military, it was the first really big international deployment that they went to. So this would actually require a new focus on cultural property protection, and also new levels of knowledge and skills for the military that would be needed. So I take a little bit of a jump in history and move on to CPP now, and how we have done it since the Bureau of Cultural Heritage has renamed the cultural section, the section of cultural information and affairs in the 1 CMI Command of the Royal Netherlands Army. So the 1 CMI Command, to give a little bit of the context that I have to work in, the 1 CMI Command is tasked with the so-called communication and engagement operations, which consist of civil-military cooperation, military public affairs, PSYOPs, and also STRATCOM. And the section of Cultural Affairs and Information is within this CMI command the Expert Center on Cultural Property Protection and on Cultural Awareness Training. We also have a joint expertise center of communication and engagement, which creates the doctrines, the basis that we need to do our work on. And we have a unit that consists of active duty military, reservists, and civilians. Lastly, we are part of the Information Maneuver Arm, and this is a new military arm that has been established in 2021, which has been created with the aim to shift the focus on operations in the physical domain to also contain cyberspace and the cognitive domain, which I will tell you a little bit more about in a second. So, about our section of Cultural Affairs and Information, what do we do, or what do I do on a daily basis? We have a section that consists of civilians plus reservists who work about 3 or 4 days a week. So I am the latter one. And our focus is, as I mentioned, cultural property protection, but also cultural awareness training, which means that we don't only focus on the Hague Convention, but we really take into account the broader cultural context that we need to operate in. Our core tasks are education and training development. So first of all, education for our entire armed forces for pre-deployment. So every military that goes to another country, they come to us first for a cultural briefing. We provide professional education on CPP and cultural awareness in, amongst others, our military academy, but also the CIMIC Center of Excellence. And we develop exercises and workshops focused on CPP and cultural awareness, and we do in-depth research on mission areas. But aside from that, we also provide cultural advice for exercises and missions, which means that we ourselves can also be deployed for missions and exercises and support commanders there in person. And lastly, we are also able to provide liaison officers for national operations. So in case there is a really big flood or again a really big fire, we can be deployed for advice as well. So how do we translate CPP into military practice? This is one of our main concerns, because in the end we are a tactical unit, and we really need to be able to make the translation between the research that we do on the countries that we go to into actions. So to give a little bit of an idea on how we do this, as I mentioned before, we are focused not only on the physical domain of operations, but also take into account the virtual domain and also the cognitive domain. So what does this mean? We also take into account the intangible part, and which consists of the narratives around cultural heritage and the narratives of history. And as you might have noticed if you are reading the newspapers also in relation to the war in Ukraine, it is not only about the physical destruction of cultural heritage, it is also a matter of influencing local populations through narratives, through fake news that are often also related to heritage and history. So this is part and parcel, according to us, of cultural property protection. So this graph on the left side kind of signifies how you can break down these different domains and can think about what does cultural heritage mean in these different domains. First on the physical level, then in the cyber domain, on social media, for example, but also in the cognitive domain. What are people feeling? What are people thinking about cultural heritage? What kind of narratives are people supporting? And all these different things we need to take into account when we are looking at our operating environment, where these different environments come together. So what this essentially means is not considering CPP as a work field that extends, or is considering CPP as a work field that extends beyond the physical to include the operating environment in its entirety. So lastly, I'm going to give you a few examples on what we have been doing in practice. And first of all, I will tell you a little bit of how we put this multi-domain perspective into exercises. So supporting exercises for us is about supporting exercises from front to back. And with this, I mean that we start with developing instructions and tools that can be used during exercises by the training audience. And we also take part in the academics phase of the training of a military exercise, which means lectures, instructions of what kind of live exercise the people are going to later in that week or in that month. So first of all, we start with the instructions and with the academics, and then when people go in the field, we make sure that CPP is also included in the scenario. And the scenarios that we work with are often much larger than just focused on CPP. They are scenarios that also include other cross-cutting topics, such as, for example, blackout. Cross-cutting topics, women, peace and security, sorry. Or for example, human trafficking. So other topics, but also including CPP. And what you see here on the middle picture is a scene where there is illegal looting that is taking place on the exercise grounds, and also illegal trading. And there's the task of the training audience to talk to the people and find out what is actually happening, report back with our reporting forms, and then we also have a feedback loop where the information of the training audience goes up the chain of command and feedback comes back to them so they get instructions and know what to do. So another example, training together. We have been talking about military exercises before, where there's often little chance of training together with civilians and with NGOs. And we try to make an effort to make sure that we also find opportunities to train together with NGOs in the field, because in the end, a lot of working together, civil-military interaction, is also a lot of expectation management, knowing what the task of the military is and knowing what the military might be able to do to support. But as my colleagues also said, the focus of the military is not to save the world's treasures, but it is to work on a mission success for the commander. So this is also an exercise that gives you a bit of that can give people working on the civilian side a realistic perspective on how the military would be able to support them. And the last example that I would like to show you is that we are also working together with NGOs and with IOs and with civilian authorities to make sure that CPP is higher on the agenda, on the political agenda. Because in the end, we are here, of course, with people that are interested in the topic and that support the topic, but in the larger scheme of things, cultural property protection, it's still a small topic. So what we've worked in for the last year is an exhibition, Culture in Times of Armed Conflict, that was on show in our National Military Museum. And we've also organized a small exhibition at NATO headquarters to also kind of kickstart the dialogue over there on the development of a CPP policy. So with that, I would like to end the presentation with a few key lessons. I know I'm going a little bit over time, but I think we have some leeway since the other people were so short and concise. So a few key lessons that I've learned in my time in the military. First of all, is that CPP needs a broader approach than just the tangible aspects, and especially when interacting with communities, a general knowledge of their culture and history is key to be effective. And this counts especially for people working in the field of CIMIC. Another point is to train not only for a foreign environment yourself, but also train for working together with international colleagues. Because for us, a lot of deployments are in an international context. As we've seen, we are working on a lot of the same things, but it would also be nice if then in an international context, we would use the same tools to report, for example, and to have a common understanding of what we are doing. Another point is that CIMIC is about knowing your stakeholders and setting the right expectations, both in national and international context. And this is also referring back to the tasks that the military can do, but also especially the responsibilities that heritage organizations have themselves, and also the tasks that museums have themselves when it comes to their safety and security of their collections. And lastly, again, engage with civilian partners and learn from academics. That is something that we do a lot, especially when developing our scenario exercises, where we really try to base our scenarios on reality, on experiences from reality. So use the knowledge that's around you and partner up where you can. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and if you would like to have more information or chat, we can do that in a break, but also here is my email address if you would be interested to talking more. So thank you very much again for the organization, and I would like to conclude here.